The blade was inches from Lira's heart when she did something no one expected. Instead of begging for mercy or trying to flee, she firmly grasped Zarvok's wrist and looked directly into his eyes, those abyss-black eyes that had witnessed centuries of destruction. And then, with a calm that defied all logic, she whispered the words that would change everything. "I know exactly who you are, Zarvok. I've seen your crimes. I've felt your darkness. And still, I choose to stay." The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to suck the air from the hall. The Shadow King's hand trembled for the first time in 300 years. The curse that bound him began to pulse violently, as if recognizing that something impossible was about to happen. But to understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back to the beginning, when Lira was just an ordinary girl who didn't believe in magic, curses, or immortal kings. Hi, I'm Tamina, and today I'm going to tell you a story that will challenge everything you believe about love and redemption. This is a fictional narrative created to make us reflect on acceptance, choices, and the transformative power of seeing beyond appearances. If you like intense stories that explore the dark side of true love, subscribe to the channel so this story can reach more people. Leave your like, share, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your interaction makes all the difference for me to keep bringing stories like this. Now get ready, because what you're about to discover about Lira and Zarvok will defy everything you think you know about fairy tales. Lira grew up in a village so small it didn't even have a name on maps. Daughter of a blacksmith and a weaver, she learned early on that life was made of hard work, practical choices, and no illusions about happy endings. While other girls dreamed of Prince Charmings, Lira dreamed of having her own workshop, creating tools that would last generations, leaving her mark on the world through her work. She was 23 when everything changed. The night began like any other, with Lira finishing polishing a series of knives commissioned for the nearby city market. The forge fire still crackled low when she heard it. It wasn't exactly a sound. It was more like an absence of sound, a void that swallowed all the night noises at once. The crickets stopped singing. The wind ceased. Even her own heart seemed to hesitate before beating again. When Lira stepped out of the workshop, what she saw made her question her own sanity. A thick black mist covered the entire village, but it wasn't ordinary mist. It moved with intent, snaking through the streets like something alive, something hungry. And then she saw them, hooded figures, too tall to be human, gliding through the mist without touching the ground. They didn't speak, but Lira felt when the invisible eyes beneath the hoods fixed on her. Her entire body froze, not from fear, but from something more primal, as if every cell recognized an ancestral predator. One of the figures extended a hand towards her, and Lira felt an irresistible force pull her forward. She tried to resist, dug her feet into the ground, clung to the doorframe, but it was like fighting gravity itself. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was her house door closing on its own, and then the world disappeared. When Lira regained consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the cold. Not the common cold of a winter night, but a cold that seemed to come from within her bones, as if her very essence was freezing. She was lying on a polished black stone floor, so smooth it reflected her pale, confused face. She slowly got up, trying to understand where she was. The place was an immense hall, with columns that rose so high the ceiling was lost in darkness. There were no windows, but a diffused bluish light emanated from the walls themselves, as if the stone were made of solidified moonlight. Ancient tapestries covered some walls, depicting battle scenes, falling kingdoms, a man with a black crown raising his hands as entire cities bowed or burned. Lira felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew these stories. Everyone did. They were legends about the Shadow King, the immortal tyrant who ruled the Forgotten Lands, a kingdom that existed between the world of the living and something much worse. They said he had been cursed centuries ago, transformed into something no longer entirely human. They said he stole people from their homes, that he fed his immortality with fear and despair. They said many things, but Lira always thought they were just stories to scare children. Until now. The voice came from everywhere at once, deep and resonant like distant thunder. "You're awake. Good. I hate it when they faint for days." Lira spun, searching for the source of the voice. And then she saw him. Zarvok stood at the top of a staircase she was sure hadn't been there seconds ago. He was tall, much taller than any man she had ever seen, with broad shoulders covered by a black cloak that seemed made of literal shadows, moving and rippling even without wind. His face was angular, beautiful in a disturbing way, with sharp cheekbones and a jawline that seemed carved from stone. But it was his eyes that commanded attention. Completely black, with no visible iris or pupil, like two absolute voids. And yet, Lira felt when they fixed on her, felt the weight of that gaze like physical pressure. But something within Lira refused to bow. Perhaps it was stubbornness, perhaps it was shock, or perhaps it was simply who she was. Instead of trembling or pleading, she crossed her arms and asked with a firmness that surprised even herself, "Why am I here?" The silence that followed was tense. Zarvok descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing through the hall like a sentence. When he stopped a few feet from her, Lira had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, but she didn't look away. Something flickered across the king's face, too quick to identify. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "Aren't you going to ask if I'm going to kill you?" he said. And there was a strange note in his voice, almost like amusement. "Would it make a difference?" Lira replied. "If you wanted to kill me, I'd already be dead. So either you want something else, or you're too bored to just get it over with. Either way, I'd rather know what's going on." For the first time in decades, Zarvok smiled. It wasn't a gentle smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives before striking. "Interesting. You're different from the others." Lira didn't like the way he said others, but she kept her voice steady. "Others what?" Zarvok began to circle her, studying her as if she were a curious piece in a collection. "Others who were brought here. Over the centuries, many have come. Some cried, some begged, some tried to seduce, some tried to fight. All failed." Lira's heart pounded, but she forced her voice to remain calm. "Failed at what?" Zarvok stopped in front of her again, leaning slightly so their faces were dangerously close. Lira could feel the cold emanating from him, could see tiny ice crystals forming in the air between them. "At freeing me," he said. And for the first time, there was something beyond coldness in his voice. There was bitterness. There was pain. And then he told her about the curse. 300 years ago, Zarvok was not a shadow king. He was just Zarvok, crown prince of a prosperous kingdom, known for his justice and compassion. He believed in the good of people, believed that love could conquer anything, believed in happy endings. And then he met Seraphine. She was everything he thought he wanted. Beautiful, intelligent, charismatic. She made him laugh, challenged him, made him feel alive in a way he had never experienced. He loved her with every fiber of his being, gave his heart completely, without reservations, without protections. And she used it against him. Seraphine was not who she pretended to be. She was a powerful sorceress, disguised, infiltrated in the kingdom with a single goal, to destroy it from within. She manipulated Zarvok, whispered poisons in his ears, turned him against his advisors, against his own family. And when he was completely isolated, completely dependent on her, she revealed the truth. Everything had been a lie. Every smile, every word of love, every moment of intimacy. She never loved him. She despised him, in fact. And now, she was going to take everything from him. But Zarvok was no longer the naive prince. The betrayal transformed him into something different, something hard and cold. He fought her, and the battle that followed destroyed half the kingdom. In the end, Seraphine was dying. But with her last breath, she cast the curse. Zarvok would live forever, but would never again feel warmth, never again feel joy, never again feel love. He would become the very darkness she always said he was inside. And the only way to break the curse would be if someone loved him, knowing exactly who he was, knowing every crime he committed, every life he took, every piece of darkness he carried. But there was a cruel trap. The curse made anyone who spent too much time near him consumed by fear or madness. It was impossible to truly know him and still love him. The curse guaranteed its own fulfillment. "And you brought other people here, hoping one of them would break the curse?" Lira asked when he finished. Zarvok laughed, but it was a humorless sound. "At first, yes. I had hope, believe it or not. But after a century, 2, 3, hope dies. Now I bring them for habit, I suppose. Or perhaps just to repeatedly prove that Seraphine was right, that I am incapable of being loved." Lira should have felt fear. She should have felt horror. But instead, she felt something unexpected. Anger. "So you kidnap innocent people, drag them to this place, and use them to self-punish? How convenient for you. How noble." Zarvok's eyes gleamed dangerously. "Watch your words, girl. You don't know who you're talking to." But Lira was beyond caution now. Something about his story, about the thinly veiled self-pity, about the way he turned his pain into an excuse to cause more pain, ignited something in her. "I know exactly who I'm talking to. I'm talking to someone who was hurt, who was betrayed, and who decided that gave him the right to hurt others. Do you think you're the only one who's ever suffered? Do you think your pain is so special that it justifies centuries of terror?" Zarvok advanced, and suddenly he was so close Lira could see tiny ice cracks forming on his skin. "You don't understand anything. You don't know what it's like to carry this, to be this." But Lira didn't back down. "You're right. I don't know. But I do know that at some point, you stopped fighting the curse and started using it as an excuse. And that's a choice. Your choice." For a long moment, Zarvok simply stared at her, and Lira couldn't read anything in those black eyes. Then abruptly, he turned away. "You'll stay here. Let's see how long your courage lasts when you truly understand what I am." And with that, he disappeared, literally dissolving into shadows, leaving Lira alone in the immense cold hall. She let out a shaky breath she didn't know she was holding. Her legs were wobbly, her heart pounded, but she had done it. She had faced the Shadow King and survived. For now. But as she looked around the empty hall, a question echoed in her mind. What exactly had she just gotten herself into? The first few days in Zarvok's castle were a surreal experience. Lira found she had the freedom to explore most of the place, though some doors remained locked, sealed with glowing symbols that hurt her eyes when she looked directly at them. The castle was immense, a labyrinth of corridors that seemed to shift configuration when she wasn't looking, of rooms that shouldn't fit within the external structure, of staircases that led to places defying physics. There was a library that spanned 3 floors, with books in languages she didn't recognize, and some that seemed to whisper as she passed. There was an indoor garden where impossible plants grew without sunlight, black and silver flowers that glowed softly in the darkness. There were empty banquet halls with tables set for feasts that would never happen, guest rooms covered in centuries of dust, a throne room where the main seat was made of pure obsidian and radiated cold. And there were servants, if they could be called that. The same hooded figures who had brought her here, gliding silently through the corridors, appearing to leave food or clean, but never speaking, never revealing what was beneath their hoods. Lira tried to talk to them a few times, but they simply ignored her, as if she were invisible. As for Zarvok, he appeared and disappeared unpredictably. Sometimes she went days without seeing him, Other times, she turned a corner, and he was there, watching her with those impossible-to-read black eyes. He never threatened her directly, never touched her, but his presence was always unsettling, always laden with something Lira couldn't name. And then, on the 10th night, everything changed. Lira was in the library, trying to decipher a book that seemed to be about the history of the Forgotten Lands, when Zarvok appeared. Not with his usual dramatic entrance, but simply materializing in the armchair opposite hers, as if he had always been there. "You read a lot," he observed. Lira closed the book carefully. "There's not much else to do here. You could try to escape. Most do." Lira considered this. "I tried. For the first 2 days. All the doors that seem to lead out actually lead back in. All the windows show the same eternal night sky. And that one time I thought I'd found a portal, it dropped me in the cellar. So I decided reading was more productive." Something that might have been respect flickered across Zarvok's face. "You're pragmatic. I appreciate that." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Lira decided to risk it. "Can I ask you a question?" Zarvok gestured vaguely, which she interpreted as permission. "Why do you really bring us here? And don't give me that answer about the curse. You yourself said you stopped believing anyone could break it. So why?" Zarvok was quiet for so long, Lira thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost reflective. "Loneliness. 300 years is a long time to be alone with your own thoughts. Even if the conversations are brief, even if they end in fear or madness, for a moment, there's another voice besides mine echoing through these halls." The raw honesty of the answer caught Lira by surprise. She had expected arrogance, cruelty, perhaps even sadistic amusement. But not this, not vulnerability. "That's sad," she said before she could stop herself. Zarvok's eyes narrowed. "I don't want your pity." But Lira shook her head. "It's not pity. It's just sad. You're so trapped in your own curse that you've turned your entire existence into a prison, and you don't even realize you're holding the key yourself." Zarvok stood up abruptly, and the air around him seemed to darken. "You know nothing about me or my curse." But Lira also stood, refusing to be intimidated. "Then show me. You want someone to truly know you? Then stop hiding behind this terrifying Shadow King facade and show me who you really are. Show me your crimes. Show me your darkness. Show me everything. Because so far, all I've seen is a very powerful man hiding in a castle, afraid to try again." The silence that followed was so intense, Lira could hear her own heart beating. Zarvok stared at her, and for the first time, she saw something beyond emptiness in those black eyes. She saw anger, yes, but also something more. Fear. Not of her, but of what she was asking. And then, to her surprise, he extended his hand. "You want to see? Then see. But don't say I didn't warn you." Lira looked at the outstretched hand, pale and with black veins visible beneath the skin. She knew this was a turning point, that if she took that hand, there would be no turning back. But she had already decided deep down, from the moment she challenged an immortal king instead of bowing. She took his hand. The world exploded into visions. Lira was no longer in the library. She was on a battlefield, surrounded by bodies. The sky was red with smoke and fire. And there, in the center of it all, was Zarvok, but not the Zarvok she knew. This one was younger, with eyes that still held color, a warm brown that was now filled with tears and fury. He held a bloodied sword, and around him, soldiers bowed or fled. "She lied!" He screamed at the sky, and his voice was broken, destroyed. "She lied about everything." And then the darkness came, not from outside but from within him, gushing like blood from a wound, spreading across the battlefield. Lira watched, horrified, as that darkness touched the soldiers and they simply faded. Not died, exactly. It was worse. They became shadows, empty husks, and then dissipated like smoke. Hundreds of them. Thousands. And Zarvok didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The newborn curse using his pain as fuel, turning his agony into destruction. The vision shifted. Now she was in a city, a beautiful city with white towers and polished stone streets. But Zarvok was there, and where he walked, winter followed. Not natural winter, but a deadly cold that froze everything instantly. People turned into ice statues in the middle of their daily lives. A woman holding a child, a man laughing with friends, a girl selling flowers, all frozen, preserved forever in their last moments. And Zarvok kept walking, his face a mask of emptiness, as if he were no longer truly present, just a conduit for the curse. More visions came, one after another, each worse than the last. Villages burned not with fire, but with cold so intense that structures simply disintegrated. Kings and queens who tried to negotiate with him, only to be turned into shadow servants. Heroes who came to defeat him, their weapons shattering against his skin before he consumed them with darkness. And through it all, Lira could feel what Zarvok felt. The constant pain, like 1,000 knives twisting in his chest. The loneliness that corroded like acid. The endless hunger the curse created, demanding fear, demanding despair, demanding that he continue causing pain to fuel his own existence. But there was also something more. Beneath all the darkness, buried so deep that perhaps even Zarvok himself didn't know it was still there, was a fragment of the man he had been. A fragment that screamed against what he was doing, that wept for every life taken, that begged for an end that would never come. Lira returned to the library with a scream caught in her throat. She was on her knees, breathing heavily, tears streaming down her face without her realizing it. Zarvok stood a few feet away, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Now you've seen," he said, and his voice was empty again. All previous vulnerability buried. "Now you know exactly what kind of monster I am, how many lives I've taken, how much suffering I've caused. So go ahead. Be afraid. Hate me. It's what they all do when they see the truth." Lira wiped her tears, her hands trembling. She had seen horrors beyond comprehension. She had felt the darkness that lived within him. She had witnessed centuries of destruction. And yet, when she looked at Zarvok, when she truly looked at him, what she saw was not a monster. She saw a broken man, trapped in a cycle of pain he didn't know how to stop. She saw someone who had suffered so much that the only way he knew how to cope was to cause more suffering. She saw someone who had given up on himself so long ago that he no longer remembered what it was like to have hope. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, and her voice was hoarse, but firm. Zarvok laughed, a bitter sound. "You're lying. I can feel your fear." Lira stood up, her legs still unsteady, but her determination unwavering. "I'm afraid of what you can do. I'm afraid of the power you carry. But I'm not afraid of you, of who you are beneath all that." She took a step towards him, and Zarvok instinctively recoiled, as if her touch could burn him. "I saw what you did. I saw the crimes. I saw the darkness. But I also saw why. I saw the pain that fuels it all. I saw that piece of you that's still screaming inside, begging for it to stop." Another step. Zarvok was against the bookshelf now, nowhere to retreat, and for the first time since Lira met him, he seemed scared. "Stop," he said. But there was no command in his voice. There was pleading. But Lira didn't stop. She continued until she was right in front of him, so close she could see the tiny cracks in his skin where the curse constantly consumed him. So close she could feel the cold emanating from him like a physical aura. And then she did something no one had done in 300 years. She placed her hand on his chest, right where a human heart should be. You are not just the curse, Zarvok. You are not just the crimes you committed. You are also the pain you carry. You are also that fragment that still fights. And as long as that fragment exists, you are not a monster. You are just someone who needs to remember how to be human again. Zarvok stood completely still, as if any movement could break the moment. His black eyes were fixed on Lira's face, and she could see something stirring in those depths. Something that might have been emotion, if he still remembered how to feel them. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, and there was something broken in his voice. "Why don't you run? Why don't you hate me?" Lira smiled, a small, sad smile. "Because I recognize pain when I see it. Because I know what it's like to feel like you're trapped in something you can't control. And because, for some reason I don't fully understand yet, I think you deserve a chance to be more than this." She withdrew her hand, and the cold where she had touched seemed less intense, as if her warmth had left a mark. "I won't pretend what you did is right. I won't pretend it wasn't horrific. But I also won't pretend you're just that. You're more complex than the curse wants you to believe." Zarvok closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was something different in them. Not exactly hope. That would be too much. But perhaps the shadow of a possibility of hope. "You're crazy," he said, but there was no malice in the words. Lira laughed, a genuine sound that echoed strangely through the silent castle. "Probably, but if I'm going to be stuck here anyway, I'd rather be crazy and try something different than sane and repeat the same patterns that have failed for 300 years. And so began something neither of them expected. In the days that followed, Zarvok began to spend more time with Lira. At first, they were just brief appearances, silent observations as she explored the castle or read in the library. But gradually, he began to speak. Small things at first. Comments about the book she chose. Observations about the history of the Forgotten Lands. Short answers to her questions. And Lira, in turn, didn't treat him like a king or a monster. She treated him like a person. She disagreed with him when she thought he was wrong. She challenged him when he fell into patterns of self-pity. She laughed at things he said, not with fear or nervousness, but with genuine humor. And slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, something in Zarvok began to change. One night, Lira found him in the indoor garden, standing among the impossible flowers, looking at one in particular, a black rose with silver veins that shimmered like stars. "Seraphine planted that," he said without looking at Lira. "It was one of the first things she did when she came to the palace. She said it was a symbol of our love, something beautiful that could grow even in darkness." He touched a petal gently, and ice formed where his fingers touched. "I should have destroyed it after I found out the truth, but I couldn't. It's pathetic, isn't it? After everything she did, I still keep a piece of her here." Lira approached, studying the flower. "It's not pathetic. It's human. You loved her, even if she didn't deserve it. That love was real for you, even if it was false for her. And keeping it doesn't mean you still love her. It means you're acknowledging that part of you existed, that you were capable of feeling that once." Zarvok finally looked at her. "How do you do that? How do you take the darkest things and find some kind of light in them?" Lira shrugged. "Practice, I guess. My mother died when I was 12. Sickness. I watched her waste away for months, saw her suffer, and there was nothing I could do. After she was gone, I was so furious. With the world, with the gods, with her for leaving me. And that anger was consuming me, turning me into something bitter and hard." She sat on the stone bench near the rosebush. "My father noticed. One night he sat with me and said something I'll never forget. He said, 'Lira, Pain is like fire. You can let it consume you, turn you to ashes, or you can learn to hold it, to mold it, to use it to forge something new. The choice is always yours. Zarvok sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. And you chose to forge something new. Lira nodded. I chose to remember that my mother wouldn't have wanted me to become bitter. She would have wanted me to live, to find joy, to do something meaningful with the time I had. So I tried to honor that. I didn't always succeed, but I tried. She looked at him directly. You can also choose, Zarvok. The curse can limit your options, can make everything harder, but it doesn't completely remove your ability to choose. You can still decide how you respond to it. Zarvok remained quiet for a long time, and Lira let the silence stretch, knowing he needed to process. Finally he spoke, and his voice was so low she almost didn't hear it. I don't know if I'm still capable of choosing. It's been so long since I just existed. Just let the curse guide me. I don't know if there's enough of me left to make real choices. Lira felt her heart clench. She slowly extended her hand, giving him time to pull away if he wanted, and touched his arm. The cold was intense, but she didn't withdraw her hand. Then let's find out together. Small choices first. You don't have to change everything at once. Just try one different thing. One small thing. Zarvok looked at her hand on his arm, as if it were the most fascinating and terrifying thing he had ever seen. Like what? Lira thought for a moment. The hooded figures. Your servants. They were people once, weren't they? Zarvok nodded stiffly. Soldiers who came to kill me. I turned them into shadows, trapped between life and death, condemned to serve me eternally. It's one of my oldest crimes. Lira squeezed his arm gently. Free one of them. Just one. Choose one, and let him go. Not because you have to. Not because someone is forcing you, but because you are choosing to be merciful. Zarvok stared at her, as if she had suggested he rip out his own heart. I don't know if I can. The curse, it feeds on what I take. If I start giving back, it might. He didn't finish, but Lira understood. The curse could turn against him, punish him for going against its nature. But she also knew that if he never tried, he would remain trapped forever. Then we try and see what happens. And if it hurts, if the curse reacts, I'll be here. You don't have to do it alone. Something flickered across Zarvok's face, something that might have been gratitude or terror or both. He stood up abruptly, and for a moment Lira thought he would flee, that she had pushed too hard. But then he extended his hand to her. Come, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it now, before I lose the courage I didn't even know I still had. Lira took his hand, and together they left the garden. Zarvok led her to a part of the castle she had never seen before, down staircases that seemed to go on forever, until the air became so cold that Lira's breath turned into ice crystals. Finally, they reached a large black iron door, covered with the same glowing symbols Lira had seen on other locked doors. Zarvok placed his hand on the door, and the symbols glowed intensely before disappearing. The door opened with a deep groan, revealing a vast hall, and there, in perfectly organized rows, stood hundreds of hooded figures, completely motionless, like statues. These are all of them, Zarvok said, and there was something heavy in his voice. All those I transformed over the centuries. Soldiers, assassins, some who came by choice, others who were sent, all trapped here, conscious but unable to act unless I command. Lira felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. She walked between the rows, looking at the figures. Now that she was so close, she could see small details. The way the hoods weren't really fabric, but solidified shadow. The way there was no visible ground beneath them, as if they were floating a few inches above the floor. The way, If she looked very closely, she could see the vague outline of faces beneath the hoods, faces frozen in expressions of horror or despair. "Can they feel?" she asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Zarvok nodded slowly. "Everything. They are conscious of every moment, every day, every year. Trapped in their own bodies, unable to speak, to move of their own will, to do anything but serve when called. It's one of the cruelest things the curse made me do." He stopped in front of one of the figures, one in the front row. This was the first. A captain of the guard from the neighboring kingdom, sent to kill me 3 days after the curse settled. He was brave, skilled. He almost succeeded. And when he failed, I didn't even think. The curse just acted through me, and suddenly he was this. Zarvok extended his hand, hesitantly, and touched the figure's shoulder. 300 years. He's been here for 300 years, conscious of every second. Lira approached, standing beside Zarvok. "Then free him. Give him back what you took." Zarvok closed his eyes, and Lira could see the tension in every line of his body. "I don't know if I remember how. It's been so long." Lira placed her hand over his, still on the figure's shoulder. "Then let's find out together. Feel the curse. Feel how it binds him. And then simply let go. Choose to release him." For a long moment, nothing happened. And then Lira felt it. A shift in the air, a change in temperature, a change in something more fundamental she had no words to describe. Zarvok's hand beneath hers began to glow, not with the usual cold light, but with something warmer, more golden. The hooded figure trembled, and then, slowly, like melting ice, the shadow began to dissipate. The hood dissolved first, revealing the face of a middle-aged man, with graying hair and wide eyes of shock. Then the rest of the shadowy form dissolved, and he fell to his knees, gasping, his hands touching the floor, as if he needed to confirm it was solid. He began, his voice hoarse from centuries of disuse. "I'm free?" Zarvok staggered back, and Lira quickly supported him. She could feel tremors running through his body, could see cold sweat on his forehead, despite the constant cold he emanated. "Yes," Zarvok said, and his voice was strained with pain. "You are free. Go. Leave this place. Live what remains of your life." The man looked at Zarvok with a complex expression, fear and anger and confusion, and something that might have been pity, all mixed together. Then he stood on unsteady legs and ran, disappearing through a door that appeared in the wall, a door that glowed with real daylight, something Lira hadn't seen since she arrived here. The door closed behind him, and Zarvok fell to his knees. Lira fell with him, holding him as he trembled violently. "The curse," he gasped. It's furious. It wants to punish. It wants..." But then something changed. The tremors subsided. The pain on his face began to ease, and when he looked at Lira, there was astonishment in his eyes. "It's passing. The pain is passing. I thought it would be worse. I thought it would last longer, but it's passing." Lira smiled, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You did it. You chose mercy, and you survived. You proved you can fight the curse." Zarvok looked at his own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "I made a choice. After 300 years, I made a real choice." And then, to both their surprise, he began to laugh. It wasn't a bitter or empty laugh. It was genuine, full of relief and astonishment and something that might have been joy. That moment in the Shadow Servants' Hall marked a fundamental shift. In the days that followed, Zarvok began to make more choices, small ones at first, but significant. He freed 3 more servants, enduring the pain of the curse's reaction each time. but finding it got easier with each attempt. He began to explore parts of the castle he had avoided for decades, places that held memories of who he had been before. He even began to talk about the past, not with bitterness, but with a kind of melancholic acceptance. And through it all, Lira was there. Not as a savior, not as a magical cure, but simply as a constant presence. She listened to him when he needed to talk. She challenged him when he fell into old patterns. She laughed with him when he made surprisingly insightful or unexpectedly funny observations. She cried with him when the memories became too much. And slowly, something began to grow between them. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something more fundamental. It was trust. It was understanding. It was the feeling of being truly seen by another person, with all the flaws and shadows, and being accepted nonetheless. One night, they were at the top of one of the castle towers, looking out at the forgotten lands stretching below. The sky was always night here, always full of unblinking stars, but there was a strange beauty to it. "Do you miss your world?" Zarvok asked suddenly. Lira considered the question honestly. "Yes and no. I miss my father. I worry about him. I miss the sun, how the world seemed simpler. But..." She hesitated, trying to find the right words. "But I don't miss who I was becoming there. I was so focused on just surviving, on just working and existing, that I had forgotten how to truly live, how to feel things deeply, how to care about something beyond the next task." She looked at him. "Here, with you, I feel more alive than I have in years. Even with all the danger, all the strangeness, all the darkness. Because here, everything matters. Every choice, every word, every moment. There's no room to just exist. You have to truly live." Zarvok stared at her, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Something warm, something vulnerable. "You make me want to live too. Not just exist, not just endure, but truly live. I had forgotten that was possible." He turned to face her completely, and Lira realized how close they were. She could see details she had never noticed before. The way his eyes weren't completely black, but had tiny flecks of silvery gray, like distant stars. The way there were small lines around his mouth, as if he had smiled a lot once, long ago. The way he looked at her now, as if she were the most precious and terrifying thing he had ever seen. "Lira," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I need to tell you something. Something I'm afraid to say, but that I can no longer keep inside." Lira felt her heart quicken. "What?" Zarvok took a deep breath, and when he spoke, every word seemed torn from somewhere deep within him. "I'm starting to feel again. Not much, not like before the curse, but small things. When you laugh, I feel something warm in my chest. When you're sad, I feel a pain that has nothing to do with the curse. When you look at me the way you're looking now, I feel..." He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I feel hope. And that terrifies me, because I don't know if I can survive losing that again." Lira felt tears prick her eyes. She slowly raised her hand and touched his face, and this time the cold wasn't as intense. Or perhaps she had just gotten used to it. "You won't lose it," she said softly, "because I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not lying to you. I'm not pretending. Everything I've shown, everything I've said, is real." Zarvok covered her hand with his, pressing it against his face. "How can you be sure? How can you know you won't wake up one day and realize I'm exactly the monster everyone says I am?" Lira smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "Because I already know you're a monster, Zarvok. I've seen your crimes, remember? I've felt your darkness. But I also know you're more than that. You're someone who's trying to be better, someone who's making difficult choices, even when it hurts. Someone who's fighting a curse that should be impossible to fight. She moved closer, until their foreheads almost touched. You're not perfect. You probably never will be. But you're real, and you're trying. And that's enough for me. For a long moment, they simply stayed like that, breathing the same air, existing in the same space. And then Zarvok did something he hadn't done in 300 years. He cried. Not tears of pain or anger, but tears of relief, of release, of something that might have been healing. Lira held him as he cried, letting her own tears fall. And there at the top of that tower in a forgotten kingdom, something impossible began to happen. The curse began to crack. Not break, not yet, but small fissures appeared, like ice beginning to melt. And through those fissures, something began to leak out. Not darkness, but light. Small, fragile, but undeniably real. Zarvok felt it too. He pulled away, looking at his hands in astonishment. What's happening? Lira looked around and saw it wasn't just his hands. The entire castle was starting to change. The black stones were developing veins of color. The shadows that always seemed too dense were becoming more transparent. And the sky, the eternally night sky, was beginning to lighten at the edges, as if dawn were finally breaking. The curse, Lira whispered. It's weakening. You're weakening it. But then something changed. The air grew heavy, oppressive. A presence manifested, something vast and furious and ancient. The curse wasn't just weakening. It was fighting back. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The fissures in the curse began to close, and more than that, the darkness began to intensify, as if concentrating, preparing for a final attack. Zarvok cried out in pain, falling to his knees. Black veins spread across his skin, more pronounced than Lira had ever seen. His eyes, which had begun to show flecks of color, turned completely black again. No, he gasped. No, not now. We were so close. Lira knelt beside him, trying to hold him, but he pushed her away. Run, he said, and his voice was becoming deeper, more resonant, more like the voice of the Shadow King, and less like the voice of the man she had come to know. The curse is taking over. It won't let me go easily. It will make me hurt you. Please, Lira, run while you still can. But Lira shook her head stubbornly. I said I wasn't going anywhere. I said if you fell, I'd fall with you. But I also said I wouldn't let you fall alone. She held his face, forcing him to look at her, even as those black eyes seemed to suck all the light around them. Fight, Zarvok. I know you can. You've made choices. You've changed. You've proven you're stronger than the curse. Don't let it win now. Zarvok trembled, and Lira could see the battle happening within him. The darkness wanting to consume, wanting to destroy, wanting to prove he could never be anything but a monster. And that fragment of humanity, larger now than it had been, fighting to remain, to choose, to be more. I don't know if I can, he whispered, and his voice was broken. It's so strong. It's always been stronger. Lira pressed her forehead against his, ignoring the cold that was now almost unbearable, ignoring the way the darkness seemed to want to pull her in too. Then use my strength. Use what you feel for me. Use the hope you said you were starting to feel. Use all of it and fight. And then she did something crazy, something that could kill her, but that she knew she had to do. She kissed him. It was like kissing pure winter, like pressing her lips against ice so cold it burned. The darkness reacted immediately, trying to envelop her, trying to consume her, trying to turn her into another victim of the curse. But Lira didn't back down. She deepened the kiss, pouring everything she felt into him. All the understanding, all the acceptance, all the hope that he could be more. And something miraculous happened. Zarvok kissed back. And when he did, when he chose this moment of connection, of vulnerability, of nascent love over the darkness, the curse screamed. Not with sound, but with a vibration that shook the very fabric of reality around them. The fissures that had begun to close exploded open. The light that had begun to leak became a deluge. And the darkness that had held Zarvok for 300 years, began to shatter. They broke apart, both gasping, and Lira saw that Zarvok's eyes were no longer completely black. There was color in them now, a warm brown she had only seen in visions of his past. "Lira," he said, and his voice was his again, not distorted by the curse. "What did you do?" Lira smiled through her tears. "I showed you that you are loved, not despite who you are, but because of who you are becoming. I showed you that you deserve to be free." The curse reacted again, more violently this time. The entire castle began to crumble around them. Towers that had stood for centuries began to fall. The ground cracked, revealing abysses of darkness below. And from somewhere deep within the castle, something began to rise. It was the physical manifestation of the curse. Lira realized with horror. A massive form of pure darkness, with eyes that were holes in the very fabric of existence, with claws that seemed made of solidified nightmares. And it was coming straight for them. Zarvok placed himself in front of Lira, and for the first time, she saw real fear on his face. Not fear for himself, but fear for her. "This is the true form of the curse," he said. "When it feels it's losing, it manifests, and it will try to destroy everything that threatens its existence. That means you." The creature of darkness roared, and the sound was like 1,000 voices screaming in agony. It advanced, and Zarvok raised his hands, invoking his own darkness to create a barrier. But Lira could see that he was struggling, that using the curse's darkness against itself was tearing him apart from within. "Stop," Lira cried, not to the creature, but to Zarvok. "You can't fight it using its own power. That's what it wants. That's how it maintains control." Zarvok looked at her over his shoulder, confusion and despair on his face. "Then what do I do? How do I fight something that is literally part of me?" Lira moved to stand beside him, taking his hand. "You don't fight. We don't fight. We choose something different." She looked at the creature of darkness, at that manifestation of centuries of pain and anger and despair, and instead of fear, she felt something unexpected. Pity. Because she realized what the curse truly was. It wasn't just a spell cast by Seraphine. It was Zarvok's pain, externalized and amplified, feeding on itself in an endless cycle. It was every moment of betrayal he felt, every tear he shed, every piece of himself he lost, all transformed into something monstrous. The curse was not separate from him. It was him, or at least, it was the part of him that was never allowed to heal. Lira squeezed Zarvok's hand and took a step towards the creature. Zarvok tried to pull her back, but she gently resisted. "Trust me," she said. "Please just trust me." And then she spoke, not to Zarvok, but to the curse. "I see you," she said, and her voice echoed strangely in the collapsing space. "I see where you came from. You are not just evil. You are pain. You are his pain, transformed into something he didn't know how to process, something he didn't know how to let go." The creature hesitated, its claws frozen in the air. He was betrayed. He was destroyed. And you were born from that destruction, a defense mechanism that became a prison. But he doesn't need you anymore. He found another way to deal with the pain. He found choice. He found hope. He found... She looked at Zarvok, and what she saw in his eyes made her smile through tears. He found love again. Real love this time. The creature trembled, and Lira could feel confusion emanating from it. It had existed for so long with a single purpose: to protect Zarvok from pain by making him incapable of feeling anything. And now, it was being told it was no longer needed. "You can go," Lira said softly. "You fulfilled your purpose. You kept him alive when he wanted to die. You kept him functioning when he would have crumbled. But now he's ready to truly live, not just survive. And that means letting you go." She extended her hand, not in attack, but in something that might have been a farewell gesture. "Thank you for keeping him safe, but he's safe with me now. You can rest." The creature looked at the outstretched hand, then at Zarvok. And Lira saw when Zarvok understood what she was doing. He took a step forward, standing beside her, and also extended his hand. "She's right," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "You've been a part of me for so long that I forgot what it was like to exist without you. But I'm ready now. I'm ready to let the pain go. I'm ready to heal. I'm ready to be more than just the sum of my traumas." He looked at the creature, at that manifestation of his own darkness, with something that might have been compassion. "Thank you for protecting me when I didn't know how to protect myself. But I don't need that protection anymore. I choose to feel again, even if it hurts. I choose to live again, even if it's scary. I choose to love again, even knowing I can be hurt." Tears streamed down his face now, and Lira realized they were real, warm, human tears, not the ice crystals she had seen before. "I choose to be free, and that means letting you go." The creature stood motionless for a long moment, and then, slowly, it began to change. The claws softened. The empty eyes filled with something that might have been understanding. The massive, terrifying form began to shrink, to transform into something smaller, something less threatening. And then it spoke, and its voice was a mixture of 1,000 voices, including Zarvok's, including echoes of all the people the curse had touched over the centuries. "I understand," it said. "I will go. But know this: the darkness I represent will never completely disappear. It is part of who you are, part of your history. The difference is that now you choose how to carry it, instead of letting it carry you." The creature looked at Lira. "And you who saw all the darkness and still chose to stay. You who loved not despite it, but through it. You broke what should have been unbreakable, not with power, not with magic, but with something much simpler and much more powerful, with acceptance, with choice, with conscious love." And then, like mist dissipating in the morning sun, the creature began to disappear. It broke into thousands of fragments of light and shadow, which danced in the air for a moment before being absorbed back into Zarvok. But this time, when the darkness returned to him, it did not consume him. It simply settled, becoming part of him again, but no longer in control. Zarvok fell to his knees, and Lira fell with him, holding him as he trembled with the magnitude of what had just happened. The castle around them stopped crumbling. The cracks in the ground began to close. And the sky, that eternally night sky, finally began to lighten. Dawn was breaking over the forgotten lands for the first time in 300 years. When Zarvok finally looked up, Lira saw that his eyes were completely human now. Warm brown with golden flecks, filled with tears and astonishment, and something that made her feel like her heart would explode. "It's broken," he whispered. "The curse is truly broken. I can feel it. I can feel everything. The cold is going away. I can feel warmth. I can feel..." He touched her face with reverence. "I can feel you. Truly feel. And it's the most incredible thing I've ever experienced." Lira laughed through her tears, pressing her hand against his. "Welcome back to humanity, Zarvok." They stayed like that for a long moment, just existing together, feeling the fundamental change that had occurred. And then Zarvok asked the question Lira knew was coming. What happens now? The curse is gone, which means you're free to go. You can go back home, to your life, to your father. You don't have to stay here anymore. Lira considered this. She thought of her village, her workshop, her father who was probably desperately wondering what had happened to her. She thought of the simple life she had left behind, the life of work and routine and quiet existence. And then she looked at Zarvok, at this man who had been a monster and who had chosen to become something more, who had fought centuries of darkness and had won, who looked at her now as if she were the most precious thing in any world. I could go, she said slowly. But I don't want to. Not yet, at least. Because our story isn't over, Zarvok. The curse may be broken, but that's just the beginning. You have 300 years of damage to undo. You have servants to free, kingdoms to make amends with, an entire lifetime to relearn how to live. She smiled. And I want to be here for that. I want to see who you become when you're no longer just fighting to survive. I want to build something new with you, something that isn't defined by curses or pasts, but by choices we make every day. Zarvok stared at her, and the hope in his eyes was so pure, so vulnerable, that Lira felt her heart clench. You would stay? Even knowing who I was, what I did. Lira placed her hands on either side of his face, forcing him to truly hear what she was about to say. I'm not staying despite who you were. I'm not staying despite what you did. I'm staying because of who you are choosing to be now. I'm staying because I see you, all of you, light and darkness, past and present. And I choose you, consciously, completely. I choose you, Ma. And then she kissed him again, but this time it was completely different. There was no cold burning her lips. There was warmth, real, human warmth. There was emotion, raw and intense. There was the promise of something new, something they would build together. When they broke apart, the sun was fully rising now, bathing the castle in golden light. And Lira saw that it wasn't just the sky that was changing. Zarvok was changing too. The extreme paleness of his skin was gaining color. The black veins were disappearing. Even his hair, which had been black as coal, was developing shades of dark brown. He was becoming human again, completely human, for the first time in 300 years. I can feel my heart beating, he said in astonishment, pressing his hand against his chest. I haven't felt my heart beat since before. It's so strange. It's so wonderful. Lira placed her hand over his, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palms. Welcome back to life, Zarvok, to real life, not just existence. They stood up together, looking out at the world around them. The castle was still standing, but it was changing. The black stones were lightening, becoming gray, then beige, then almost white. Windows that had been dark for centuries were filling with light. Doors that had been locked were opening. And down below, in the Forgotten Lands, Lira could see changes too. The eternal mist was dissipating. Trees that had been dead were sprouting green leaves. Rivers that had been frozen were beginning to flow. The entire kingdom was awakening, freed along with its king. There's so much to do, Zarvok said, and there was a note of anxiety in his voice. So many people to make amends with, so many wrongs to try to right. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if they'll forgive me. Lira took his hand, intertwining their fingers. Maybe some won't forgive, and that's okay. You can't control how others react, only how you act. But you can try. You can spend the rest of your life, your human life now, trying to do better, and you won't have to do it alone. Zarvok looked at her, and the hope in his eyes was so pure, so vulnerable, that Lira felt tears prick again. Why you? Of all the people who could have been brought here, why did it have to be you? The only person crazy enough, brave enough, stubborn enough not to give up on me? Lira laughed. Maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe the curse in its last act brought exactly the person you needed. Or maybe it's just absurd luck. Either way, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. They stood on the tower top for another moment, watching the sun fully rise, transforming the forgotten lands into something new, something full of possibility. And then Zarvok turned to her with determination in his eyes. There's something I need to do, something I should have done a long time ago. He led her back to the Shadow Servants' Hall, where the hundreds of remaining figures still stood in their silent rows. But now, with the curse broken, Lira could see that they were beginning to stir, as if sensing the change in the air. Zarvok walked to the center of the hall and raised his hands. When he spoke, his voice echoed with power, but it wasn't the cold, dead power of the curse. It was something different, something warmer, more human. You who were trapped here by my crimes, you who suffered at my hand, you who were turned into shadows and forced to serve, I free you, all of you. I cannot undo what has been done. I cannot return the years that were stolen, but I can give you back your lives, what remains of them. I can give you choice. He closed his eyes, and Lira saw light begin to emanate from him. Not the cold light of the curse, but something golden and warm. The light spread through the hall, touching each hooded figure, and one by one they began to transform. The shadows dissipated, revealing the men and women beneath. Some were young, some were old, some were confused, some were crying. But all were free. The process took hours. Each liberation drained Zarvok a little more, and Lira could see the fatigue accumulating in him. But he didn't stop. Not until the last shadow servant had been restored. Not until the hall was filled with real, living, free people. When it was over, Zarvok staggered, and Lira quickly supported him. He was pale, exhausted, but there was satisfaction on his face. "It's done," he whispered. "They are all free." The freed people surrounded them, and Lira half expected anger, expected them to attack, to demand revenge. But instead, she saw something more complex. There was anger, yes, but there was also understanding. There was pain, but there was also relief. There was confusion about what to do now, but there was also gratitude for finally being free. A man stepped forward, the same Captain Zarvok had freed first. He looked at Zarvok for a long moment, and then spoke. "You imprisoned us. You made us suffer for centuries. That cannot be easily forgiven, if it can be forgiven at all." Zarvok nodded, not trying to defend himself. "I know, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. All I can offer are my apologies, however inadequate, and my commitment to try to do better from now on." The captain studied him, then looked at Lira, who was still supporting Zarvok. "She changed you. We could feel it, even trapped as we were. We could feel the curse weakening, feel you fighting it. And in the end, you chose to free us, even knowing it could destroy you." He extended his hand, not in friendship, but in something that might have been a truce. "I don't forgive you. Not yet, maybe never. But I recognize that you are no longer the monster who imprisoned me. And that's a start." Zarvok took the hand, and Lira saw tears streaming down his face again. "Thank you. It's more than I deserve." Others approached, each with their own words, their own reactions. Some were hostile, some were cautious, some were surprisingly compassionate, but all recognized that something fundamental had changed, that the Shadow King who had imprisoned them was no longer who stood before them. Eventually, doors appeared in the hall walls, doors that led back to the outside world, to the places from which these people had been taken. Some of the doors showed places that no longer existed, kingdoms that had fallen in the 300 years since their inhabitants had been captured. For these people, Zarvok offered a place in the Forgotten Lands, now reborn, if they wished. Some accepted, others chose to try their luck in the changed world. Lira watched as, one by one, they left the hall, left the castle, left behind centuries of imprisonment. And when the last one had gone, when the hall was empty except for her and Zarvok, she finally let out the breath she didn't know she was holding. "You did it," she said. "You really did it." Zarvok turned to her, and despite the exhaustion, there was peace on his face. "We did it. I never would have succeeded without you. You showed me that change was possible. You showed me that I was more than the curse." They returned to the main chambers of the castle, which had transformed into something completely different. Where before there had been black stone and eternal cold, now there were walls of light marble and lit fireplaces. Where before there had been tapestries depicting destruction, now there were open windows showing the reborn kingdom outside. It was as if the castle was reflecting its owner's transformation. Lira helped Zarvok sit in an armchair near the fireplace, and he pulled her down with him, holding her as if he feared she would disappear if he let go. "What do we do now?" he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made her smile. "Now you rest. You just broke a 300-year curse and freed hundreds of people. You've earned a rest." She snuggled against him, marveling as always at the warmth of his body, at the living proof of his restored humanity. "And after you rest, we start building. We figure out how to govern this kingdom in a new way. We reach out to the other kingdoms, try to make amends. We create something that isn't defined by the past, but by the future we choose." Zarvok kissed the top of her head. "And you'll stay with me? Through all of it?" Lira looked up, meeting his eyes. "I already said yes, but eventually I'll need to visit my father, let him know I'm okay. He must be worried." Zarvok nodded. "Of course. We'll go together if you want. I'd like to meet the man who raised someone so extraordinary." Lira smiled. "He'll like you. After he gets over the initial shock of his daughter dating an immortal ex-Shadow King." Zarvok laughed, and the sound was so free, so genuine, that Lira felt her heart swell. "Ex-Shadow King. I like that. It implies I'm something different now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just existing together, feeling the weight of everything that had happened begin to settle. And then Zarvok spoke again, his voice low and serious. "Lira, I need to say this, even if it's scary, even if I haven't said it in 300 years. I love you. Not in the desperate, blind way I loved Seraphine, but in a deeper, more real way. I love you because you saw me at my worst and didn't run. I love you because you challenged me to be better. I love you because you showed me that I was still capable of change, of growth, of choice." He pulled away just enough to look into her eyes. "I love you because you didn't try to save me. You gave me the tools to save myself, and that made all the difference." Lira felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, Zarvok. I love you for your strength, for your vulnerability, for the way you fight your own darkness every day. I love you for the man you are becoming, and I love you enough to accept the man you were, because all of that is part of you, and I choose all of it." They kissed, and it was different from all previous kisses. There was no urgency, no desperation, no fear. There was only love, pure and simple and real. There was the promise of tomorrows, of building something together, of facing whatever came side by side. When they broke apart, Zarvok rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if we'll be able to make amends with everyone I hurt. I don't know if this kingdom can truly recover. But I know I'll try. And I know that with you by my side, I have a chance." Lira smiled. "We have a chance. Together." And there, in that castle that had been a prison and was now a home, in that kingdom that had been forgotten and was now being reborn, in that moment, between the end of one era and the beginning of another, two unlikely people found something neither of them expected. They found love. Not the fairy tale love that conquers all effortlessly, but the real, complicated, imperfect love. The love that sees all flaws and chooses to stay. The love that doesn't save, but supports. The love that doesn't magically heal, but gives strength to heal oneself. The conscious love that knows the darkness and still chooses the light. And that love, they discovered, was the most powerful of all, because it wasn't based on illusions or lies. It was based on truth, on choice, on acceptance. And nothing, not even the most powerful curse, could break that. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Zarvok and Lira worked side by side to rebuild not only the castle, but the entire kingdom. They reached out to neighboring kingdoms, offering reparations where possible, apologizing where necessary, and slowly, very slowly, beginning to build bridges where before there had only been fear and hostility. It wasn't easy. There were many who couldn't forgive, who looked at Zarvok and saw only the monster he had been. There were those who tried to take advantage of his newfound vulnerability, who tried to attack while he was still weak from the breaking of the curse. There were days when Zarvok doubted himself, days when the darkness that still lived within him threatened to consume him again. But through it all, Lira was there. Not as a savior, not as a cure, but as a partner. She reminded him of his choices when he forgot. She challenged him when he fell into old patterns. She held him when the pain of the past became too much. And she loved him, constantly, consciously, completely. And Zarvok, in turn, learned to reciprocate that love. He learned to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to admit when he was struggling. He learned that strength was not never showing weakness, but having the courage to be honest about his limitations. He learned that being human meant being imperfect, and that was okay. They visited Lira's father, and although the initial meeting was tense, the old blacksmith saw what his daughter saw. A man trying to be better, a man who loved his daughter with everything he had. And slowly, he accepted Zarvok, not despite his past, but recognizing his journey of change. The Forgotten Lands flourished. People began to settle there, drawn by the promise of a new beginning, of a place where the past did not define the future. Zarvok ruled not as a shadow king, but as a leader who had known both darkness and light, and who chose the light every day. And through it all, their love remained constant. Not unchanged, because real love grows and evolves, but constant in its commitment, in its choice, in its acceptance. They had challenges, of course. There were days when Zarvok's darkness threatened to return, when the weight of his past seemed too much to bear. There were days when Lira doubted, when she wondered if she had made the right choice, if she was strong enough for this life. But they always came back to each other, always chose to communicate, to work through problems, to remember why they had chosen this path. And always, they chose love. Conscious love. Love that saw everything and still said yes. Love that was not blind, but had its eyes wide open. A year after the curse broke, Zarvok took Lira back to the indoor garden, to the black rosebush Seraphine had planted. But the rose had changed. It was still black, but now it had red petals mixed in, and the silver veins shimmered more intensely. "It's changing," Zarvok said, touching a petal gently. "Like me. It was a symbol of a false love, but it's becoming something new. A symbol of transformation." of how even the darkest things can find light. He turned to Lira, and there was a nervousness in his eyes that she hadn't seen for months. Lira, you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You showed me that I was more than my worst self. You loved me through the darkness and into the light. And I want to spend the rest of my life, my human, mortal, precious life, returning that love. He knelt, and Lira felt her heart stop. From his pocket, he took out a ring. It wasn't ornate or covered in jewels. It was simple, made of silver with a single black stone that glowed with internal light. This ring is made from a fragment of the curse, he explained. The last piece I kept, transformed into something beautiful. A reminder of where I came from, but also of where I chose to go. A symbol that even the deepest darkness can be turned into something precious. He looked at her with eyes full of love and hope and vulnerability. Lira, will you marry me? Not the Shadow King, not the monster, but the man you helped create? Will you build a life with me, with all the challenges and joys that would bring? Lira was crying, but they were tears of pure joy. She knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. Yes, 1,000 times yes. I choose you, Zarvok. I choose our life together. I choose everything we are and everything we will become. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he did, the black stone glowed intensely for a moment, then settled into a soft, steady shimmer. And there, in that garden that had been a memorial to a false love, they sealed their commitment with a real love. They married when spring came to the Forgotten Lands, the first real spring in 300 years. It was a simple ceremony, with Lira's father present, some of the freed servants who had chosen to stay, and representatives from neighboring kingdoms who were beginning to accept Zarvok's change. There was no excessive pomp or circumstance. There were just two people, standing under a sky finally free of curses, promising to love each other through everything life brought. And when they kissed, sealing their vows, the entire kingdom seemed to celebrate. Flowers bloomed instantly. Birds that hadn't been seen in centuries returned, filling the air with song. The sun shone more brightly, as if even nature itself recognized the importance of that moment. That night, as they stood on the balcony of their chambers, looking out at the kingdom they had helped to rebirth, Zarvok pulled Lira close. "Do you know what's most incredible about all of this?" he asked. Lira snuggled against him, marveling as always at the warmth of his body, at the living proof of his restored humanity. "What?" Zarvok smiled, and it was a smile of pure joy. "I'm happy. Genuinely, completely happy. I didn't know that was possible. I thought the curse had destroyed my ability to feel that. But here I am, holding my wife, looking out at our kingdom, and I'm happy." Lira looked up, meeting his eyes. "You deserve happiness, Zarvok. You fought for it, chose it, built it. And I'll spend the rest of my life reminding you of that whenever you forget." He kissed her forehead gently. "And I'll spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me. How much you saved not just my life, but my soul." Lira shook her head. "I didn't save your soul. You saved your own soul. I just reminded you that it was still there, waiting to be rediscovered." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just existing together, feeling the weight of everything that had happened begin to settle. And then Zarvok spoke again, his voice low and serious. "Lira, I need to say this, even if it's scary, even if I haven't said it in 300 years. I love you. Not in the desperate, blind way I loved Seraphine, but in a deeper, more real way. I love you because you saw me at my worst and didn't run. I love you because you challenged me to be better. I love you because you showed me that I was still capable of change, of growth, of choice." He pulled away just enough to look into her eyes. "I love you because you didn't try to save me. You gave me the tools to save myself. and that made all the difference. Lira felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. I love you too, Zarvok. I love you for your strength, for your vulnerability, for the way you fight your own darkness every day. I love you for the man you are becoming, and I love you enough to accept the man you were. Because all of that is part of you, and I choose all of it. They kissed, and it was different from all previous kisses. There was no urgency, no desperation, no fear. There was only love, pure and simple and real. There was the promise of tomorrows, of building something together, of facing whatever came side by side. When they broke apart, Zarvok rested his forehead against hers. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if we'll be able to make amends with everyone I hurt. I don't know if this kingdom can truly recover. But I know I'll try. And I know that with you by my side, I have a chance. Lira smiled. We have a chance, together. And there, in that castle that had been a prison and was now a home, in that kingdom that had been forgotten and was now being reborn, in that moment between the end of one era and the beginning of another, two unlikely people found something neither of them expected. They found love, not the fairy tale love that conquers all effortlessly, but the real, complicated, imperfect love. The love that sees all flaws and chooses to stay. The love that doesn't save, but supports. The love that doesn't magically heal, but gives strength to heal oneself. The conscious love that knows the darkness and still chooses the light. And that love, they discovered, was the most powerful of all, because it wasn't based on illusions or lies. It was based on truth, on choice, on acceptance. And nothing, not even the most powerful curse, could break that. Years passed, and the story of the Shadow King and the girl who freed him became legend. But unlike most legends, this one was not embellished or simplified. It was told in all its complexity, with all its darkness and light, because Zarvok and Lira insisted on it. They wanted people to know the truth. That redemption is not instantaneous or easy. That love does not magically conquer everything. That change requires constant choice, daily effort, unwavering commitment. They wanted people to know that even those who had fallen deepest into darkness still had the capacity to choose the light. That no one was beyond the possibility of change, as long as they were willing to do the work. And they wanted people to know that loving someone with darkness did not mean ignoring that darkness, or pretending it didn't exist. It meant seeing all the truth and still choosing to stay, still choosing to support, still choosing to believe in the capacity for growth. The Forgotten Lands became a refuge for those seeking second chances, for those who had made mistakes, who carried darkness, who were struggling to be better. Zarvok and Lira created a place where the past was acknowledged, but not defining, where people were judged not by what they had been, but by what they were choosing to become. And through it all, their love remained constant, not unchanged, because real love grows and evolves, but constant in its commitment, in its choice, in its acceptance. They had challenges, of course. There were days when Zarvok's darkness threatened to return, when the weight of his past seemed too much to bear. There were days when Lira doubted, when she wondered if she had made the right choice, if she was strong enough for this life. But they always came back to each other, always chose to communicate, to work through problems, to remember why they had chosen this path, and always, they chose love. Conscious love. Love that saw everything and still said yes. Love that was not blind, but had its eyes wide open. And so, the king who had been shadow, and the girl who had seen through the darkness, lived. Not happily ever after in the simplistic way of fairy tales, but happily in the complex and real way of true life. Happy in the moments of joy and growing together through the moments of pain. Happy in the daily choice of love, of commitment, of seeing and being seen. And when, many years later, they were old and their hair was gray, when they sat together watching the sunset over the kingdom they had helped to build, Zarvok took Lira's hand and said, "Thank you." Lira smiled, squeezing his hand. "For what?" Zarvok looked at her, and his eyes still shone with the same love that had grown in those difficult early days. "For seeing me, for staying, for showing me that I was more than my worst self, for loving me not despite who I was, but through who I was, to who I could become." Lira leaned in, kissing him gently. "Thank you for letting yourself be seen, for choosing to change, for fighting your darkness every day, for loving me with everything you are." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the day turn into night. And when the stars appeared, real and bright and free of any curse, they knew they had done something extraordinary. They hadn't just broken a curse. They had proven that conscious love, love that sees all the truth and still chooses to stay, was the most powerful force that existed. They had proven that redemption was possible, not through magic, but through choice. They had proven that even the deepest darkness could find light, if it was willing to try. And they had proven that the truest love was not the one that saved, but the one that empowered. Not the one that magically healed, but the one that gave strength to heal oneself. Not the one that ignored flaws, but the one that saw them and still said, "I choose you. Today, tomorrow, always, I choose you." And that choice, renewed every day, made all the difference. That was the true magic. That was the true liberation. And that was the story of how conscious love freed the Shadow King, not from the chains of the curse, but from the chains he himself had forged around his heart, and how, in freeing him, Lira also freed herself, becoming more than she ever imagined possible. Together, they proved that the most powerful love is not that of fairy tales. It is real, imperfect, conscious love. The love that sees everything and still chooses to stay. And that love can indeed change everything.